Solomon's asset allocation strategy represents the most precise financial architecture ever documented in history. The specific income trap this system was engineered to dismantle is currently causing the collapse of more families than any economic recession in recent memory. You should stay until the very end, as there is a prayer waiting for you constructed from the same profound wisdom that made one ancient king wealthier than every modern billionaire combined. But first, consider what happens to a building supported by only one wall. A single paycheck is essentially a countdown timer masquerading as security. Right now, tens of millions of individuals wake up, go to that single job, deposit that single amount, and sincerely believe they have constructed something stable. These are not careless people. They have simply been provided with a blueprint containing a structural flaw so fundamental that no one thought to question it, because everyone around them was following the same design. The correction begins with the Talmud's 33% rule, though not in the manner most people would expect. Ancient Jewish sages embedded a macro protection framework within the Babylonian Talmud. Divide your resources into thirds. 1/3 should be in land, 1/3 in active business, and 1/3 held in liquid reserves. This was not merely financial advice for the prosperous. It was the survival floor for anyone who intended to outlast an economy they could not fully control. 3 streams, 3 categories. These sages had observed enough history to realize that no single asset class survives every season without interruption. However, Solomon refuses to stop at 3. In Ecclesiastes 11:2, the preacher writes, "Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what disaster may come upon the earth." You must read the phrase, or even 8, carefully, because it performs a very precise function. In the Hebrew literary tradition, an ascending numerical pair, 7 then 8, is an emphatic construction. 7 is the covenant number, representing the complete span, while 8 signifies a new beginning, the step beyond completion. Together they communicate something urgent. Build full coverage and then build one more position past full coverage, because the threat you are preparing for is not the one you can currently name. Solomon was engineering against ignorance, not merely managing anxiety. The mathematics behind that instruction are unforgiving. If one income stream collapses, you lose 100% of your cash flow immediately with no buffer and no time to recover. If you are spread across 7 streams, one failure takes away roughly 14% of your flow, while 6 others keep the structure alive. The entire architecture absorbs the shock that would have flattened the single-pillar version. The preacher was not writing poetry in that chapter. He was drafting load-bearing specifications for a life that had to hold weight under conditions it could not predict. A layoff, a medical emergency, or a platform that changes its rules overnight. Solomon had already calculated for all of it 3,000 years before any of us lived through it. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Your city, your country, or your region. Because what Solomon designed, he designed for every economy and every season, and we want to know how far this word has traveled today. In 1939, Europe was burning. Every analyst with a column and a credential was screaming for people to sell and protect whatever they had left. John Templeton borrowed $10,000, money he did not actually own, and bought 100 shares of every single stock on the New York Stock Exchange, trading below $1 per share, totaling 104 companies. 37 of them were already in bankruptcy proceedings the day he bought in. 4 years later, that $10,000 had become $40,000. The result did not come from picking the right company. It came from distributing deliberately across everything the market had already written off. Templeton later described the principle in terms that could have come straight from a commentary on Ecclesiastes. If you are diversified among different forms of wealth, nations, and industries, you will be safe in the long run. He was paraphrasing a king without even knowing it. Solomon's biography is not the warm-up to this teaching, it is the evidence. By the time he completed the temple and established his court, Solomon had constructed interlocking streams that no single catastrophe could dismantle at once. These included cedar imports from Hiram of Tyre, documented in 1 Kings 5:10-12, copper extraction from the Araba Valley, and maritime trade fleets reaching Ophir and Tarshish, recorded in 1 Kings 9:28. He also had agricultural estates laid out in Ecclesiastes 2:4-6, and a wisdom for tribute economy in which neighboring kings paid for access to counsel that no army in the region could replicate. The man was not a king who happened to be wealthy. He was a functioning portfolio with a crown on top. Two of those streams form the foundation that every serious builder must establish before adding anything else. The labor stream is first, direct production through skill and time, the work your hands and mind perform. The trade stream follows, positioning knowledge, goods or services between a need and a market, and capturing the margin in between. Solomon ran both at the same time and treated neither one as sufficient by itself. Those are the first two jars in the seven-jar framework. Each jar holds a designated function: provision for daily needs, a liquid reserve for emergencies, seed capital for new ventures, a tithe set apart for the Lord's purposes, a long-term fund for land and property, an allocation for learning and wisdom that compounds over time, and a generational transfer fund, the inheritance that Proverbs 13:22 describes as the blessing stored up for a grandchild who has not yet been born. 7 jars, 7 functions, with no stream bleeding into the next and no emergency reserve quietly becoming a spending account. Modern portfolio theory spends thousands of pages arriving at this exact framework, yet Solomon wrote it in one verse. If something today is shifting the way you see what you have been managing, press the like button now so the channel can reach the next person who needs to hear this. Why 7 streams? Why that number and not 5 or 10? In the Hebrew tradition, 7 is the number of complete covenant coverage, the full span of a created week, and the architecture of Sabbath rest after divine labor. When Solomon writes 7, he is establishing the floor of genuine protection, the minimum structure below which a person is exposed rather than covered. The or even 8 pushes deliberately past that floor into overflow. It is the 8th note that opens a new octave, the extra position whose only job is to survive the disaster that takes one of the 7 you could not predict was coming. That 8th stream is not ambition. It is structural honesty about a future you cannot fully calculate. Benjamin Graham spent most of his career translating that same instinct into modern investment language. In Chapter 20 of The Intelligent Investor, he reduced his entire framework to 3 words: margin of safety. Never pay full price for any asset. Buy it at a discount deep enough below its intrinsic value that even a flawed estimate still leaves you protected. Warren Buffett illustrated it with an image that stays with you. You design a bridge to carry 30,000 pounds, but you only send 10,000-pound trucks across it. The gap between the load and the capacity is not wasted space. It is the reason the bridge is still standing when the heavy truck you never planned for shows up. Solomon's 8th stream is that gap expressed as income architecture rather than equity valuation. C.S. Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity that God is not satisfied with less than everything. While Lewis was writing about surrender rather than stewardship, the structural principle carries across both. A man who manages 6 streams while leaving 2 of his capacity untouched has not exercised caution. He has left a section of the roof unfinished and is counting on it never raining in that corner. The Ecclesiastes shielding land, cash, and business as the 3 primary categories across which streams are distributed functions as one integrated act of trust. Land anchors you to the physical world God declared good in Genesis 1, something that has held value across every currency collapse in recorded history. Cash gives you the mobility to act when frozen people around you cannot move, and business is the active engine that Proverbs 31 describes through the woman of valor, buying fields, planting vineyards, evaluating her trading, and working with willing hands while the household around her is sustained by the structure she built. The thing that destroys more serious builders than laziness ever could does not announce itself as a flaw. It arrives dressed as depth. A man studies a single market, a single platform, or a single trade, and the deeper he goes, the more persuaded he becomes that concentration is simply the natural conclusion of genuine expertise. So he commits everything to one position, and for a while, if the market cooperates, the results seem to validate the logic. Then the company misses earnings, the platform rewrites its algorithm, or the industry shifts direction. Everything placed on that single pillar comes down with it. Proverbs 14:15 describes the prudent man as one who gives thought to his steps, and the Hebrew carries the specific nuance of someone who sees ahead of what is currently visible. Placing everything on one position, regardless of how well you understand it, removes the structural function that Solomon built the 7-8 rule to provide. Charlie Munger spent decades studying how that kind of collapse unfolds psychologically, calling the force behind it the Lollapalooza effect. Multiple biases stacking in the same direction at the same time, producing consequences far more severe than any one bias could generate alone. In a concentrated position, commitment bias keeps the investor from exiting even when signals shift. Social proof from others holding the same asset reinforces his confidence. Confirmation bias quietly filters out every warning that contradicts his thesis. And the memory of recent gains convinces him the pattern is structural when it is actually cyclical. Solomon had diagnosed the same pattern 3,000 years earlier, using different vocabulary. Picture what that looks like on a Tuesday morning. The alarm goes off, and before your feet hit the floor, you check your phone. The company holding 60% of your portfolio is down 19% on an earnings miss. Your freelance contract, the only income stream outside your salary, just paused because the client lost their funding. And your emergency reserve has enough in it to cover only 3 weeks of expenses. None of that happened because of bad luck. It happened because the structure was always going to respond that way under pressure. The path from one stream to 3 does not require doing everything at once. Start with what you already have, your primary skill and current labor. Add a trade stream when you are ready, then build toward a passive or semi-passive stream like land, dividends, or digital products. Each addition reduces the weight that the one before it was carrying alone. John Wesley gave factory workers 3 commands: gain all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. Gain without damaging your body or conscience. Save by eliminating prideful spending. Give because the accumulation was never permanently yours. When you place Solomon's 7-8 rule next to Wesley's commands, you find 2 translations of the same original text directed at the human tendency to build too narrowly. Before we close, perform a good abandonment audit. Write down every resource you manage: time, income, assets, skills, and networks. Ask, is this stream protected by structure? Is this asset diversified? Am I managing this with an open hand before God? The audit is not meant to produce guilt, but to repair the foundation. Close your eyes or align your thoughts with mine as we bring this before the Lord. Father, we come before you as stewards who have not always governed well. We ask for the wisdom Solomon asked for, a discerning heart to manage faithfully what you entrust to us. Teach us to build structures that can survive what we cannot see coming. Give us the courage to spread what fear wants to hoard and the discipline to protect what comfort tells us to spend. Let every stream we open flow ultimately toward your purposes. We receive this wisdom as a gift from the one who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. We trust you with the architecture. Guide our hands as we build it. Amen. Go in peace and go in structure. What God builds does not fall. If this exploration of Solomon's ancient financial architecture has changed the way you view your own security, please subscribe and like the channel. We are dedicated to excavating the historical wisdom that the modern world has tried to bury. Start building a future that can withstand any storm. The next treasury of insight will be opened for you very soon.